Awesome. Well, I think we can kick off, eh? So I've been asked to chair this briefing pretty much because in the regional council we've had a bit of a change around in our committee structures. So the future development stuff's come into the basically the policy area. So that's my area. So Anita asked me to chair this briefing. So welcome everybody to this briefing of the Queenstown Future Development Strategy. Basically, that's a briefing that is to bring everybody back to speed after, I wouldn't say put on hold, but put on hold, being delayed for a while, just while the underlying modelling was like finalised around the housing and building assessments, etc. So with us, we've got Anita and Heidi. Hi, Heidi, and they're supported also with, well, I've got Liz. Liz is there, I think, somewhere. Liz Simpson from Queenstown Lakes, and now we also have Anita Mark II from Queenstown Lakes on the iPhone, and we've got Ify here. I'm not sure where you fit in Ify.
He's in our team as well, Lloyd.
You're in our team. Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. Apologies for that.
No worries.
So that's pretty much that. It's pretty much a briefing, and I'm just going to hand over to Anita now and run us through. So just feel free to ask questions if you feel it's the appropriate time. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Lloyd. And Heidi's going to drive the presentation from her end, which will mean she can't see hands up. So so Lloyd and I, if you're happy, we'll manage any questions from councillors. But as Lloyd said, the purpose is just to refamiliarise councillors with the Queenstown Spatial Plan and Future Development Strategy work. So you'll be familiar with the Dunedin FDS, which has been through the process and is out the other side, and we're in the implementation phase. But the Queenstown one has had some challenges because of the rapid growth in Queenstown. So we're going to explain what the spatial plan is and what the future development strategy is and how they're developed. We're going to just provide a bit of a forward-looking overview of what the work looks like coming forward, where touch points are for councillors, how the public can have a say, and some of the key milestones. And then there's an opportunity for any questions of staff. That sort of overview work program will also shadow a little bit of the constraints that we have. Obviously, everyone's well aware of RM reform, and that is a real challenge for us. So Lloyd has helpfully done the introductions, and yeah, so Heidi and Ify are our urban team, which is great. Heidi's based over in Queenstown, which is really useful for this work, and Ify's in Dunedin, and they work across both the Dunedin and the Queenstown FDSs, so we can move learnings across from one to the other. This work is what we call the Spatial Plan Generation 2.0. So the first generation spatial plan was a partnership with the Crown and iwi, and ORC was a stakeholder in that. But when the NPS was updated, that spatial plan didn't give effect to the new NPS, and it's required us to do some more work. Sorry, I'm just getting some kisses from my dog, which is less than helpful. So there is an existing governance structure and executive steering group, project steering group, and things like that. Our representatives on that governance group are Councillor Forbes and Councillor Noon, and Richard as members. I'm just looking at my notes. We've sort of talked about the fact that the work has been paused and we're now restarting. Some of those key dependencies that we'll talk through, the RM reform, fast track consents, regional deals. So really this is just a refamiliarisation to bring it back to front of mind, to let you know where we're at, to basically get us up to speed with where Queenstown Lakes councillors are, so that we can have some joint workshops further down the track where we get more into the substance. So I'm going to pass over to Heidi now, and Heidi, I'll keep an eye on questions, but yeah, we'll kick off. Unlikely to take 90 minutes, so any well-timed briefing should give you time back, and that's what we're aiming to do. So I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Anita. So I'm going to start with a quick recap on the existing spatial plan. That's Generation 1 or Gen 1. That's been in place for nearly 4 years now, which in the really high growth Queenstown context is a long time. And what Gen 1 does is just provides that really high level vision and the broad framework around where growth should happen in the Queenstown district. In terms of ORC's roles, when Generation 1 was developed, so we were a stakeholder at that time, and Generation 1 was developed by an urban growth partnership, as Anita said. ORC joined that formal urban growth partnership in 2022, so after adoption of Gen 1. So just to refamiliarise you with our changing role there, we've gone from being a stakeholder into being a formal partner in the work. And just touching back in terms of the key policy elements of Generation 1. So it's seeking to achieve these high-level outcomes that you see on the slide there. So more consolidated growth, greater housing choice, more use of public and active transport, more sustainable tourism, well-designed neighbourhoods, and more economic diversification. And sitting underneath those outcomes, the spatial plan is bringing together a whole range of detailed implementation strategies. On the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that looks like geographically. So we're still with Generation 1. Generation 1 identified some areas in the district as being priority areas for development. And so on the left-hand side, we've got Queenstown, on the right-hand Wanaka. The big red circles are the big metropolitan type areas, if you like, and the orange are those smaller neighbourhood or local type centres, and the yellow is showing areas identified for future urban development. So in Queenstown, those areas are around in the southern corridor around Jacks Point area, in Frankton, Ladies Mile, in Wanaka, one of those areas is in southern Wanaka. As well as that spatial growth element, just moving to the next slide, the spatial plan has wider scope than just the geographic aspect. So it includes a whole range of other initiatives that support the district as well. And some of those examples are things like the Joint Housing Action Plan, Queenstown's Economic Diversification Plan. And what that means for ORC as well in the next generation work is that we've got an opportunity to look across all of our different work programs and identify what we've got going on that could help to deliver Generation 2. So that might be, for example, work that our hazards team are doing or work that our catchment management team are doing. So we've got that opportunity to look for levers that we've got and to join that up. So that's a bit of a recap on the existing spatial plan Gen 1. On the next slide, so moving into the Generation 2 work area, I just want to spend a bit of time on this slide at a higher level talking around the scope of the Generation 2 work, the statutory scope, if you like, and a bit more about how that work is overseen at a governance and an operational level. So as I was saying on the previous slide, the spatial plan is that visioning, that broad document, and the spatial plan is a non-statutory document and it's broader than resource management matters. That is something that might change in the resource management reforms, and I'll come to that later on. But at this stage in the frame we're in, spatial plans are currently non-statutory. And with the Generation 2 work, the intention is to create a future development strategy and bring that into Generation 2. And what that means is that we're bringing some statutory content in the future development strategy and combining that into Generation 2. I'm sure most of you are familiar, and as Anita said at the start, the future development strategy is developed under the statutory context of the RMA, and that's the National Policy Statement on Urban Development that drives that content. And that National Policy Statement specifically provides for combining future development strategies into a spatial plan in the way that we're proposing to do. What that means ultimately is that both the councils, ORC and QLDC, would ultimately adopt the document, and the formal growth, the Urban Growth Partnership would endorse that. And that just takes me into more about how the whole work program is overseen. So as Anita was saying earlier on, there's an existing governance structure which is sitting with this Grow Well Waiora partnership, and ORC has representation at the various levels of that governance and operational body. So we have our councillor membership at the highest level on the governance body. Sitting below that, there's also a steering group, and ORC has representation there at general manager level. That's our Anita Dorr. And then sitting below that again, there's a more operational oversight group where ORC has manager representation. And then below that, we have more a staff level working group. And so myself and Effie and Liz and our QODC colleagues are working really closely together there. And we bring in other specialist teams from ORC as needed. So we reach out to our hazards team and our transport team, for example, as needed. So we're represented at all those different levels in the work. So I just wanted to spend a bit of time on that, just to kind of orient to the various statutory frame and the structures that are around that. And on this next slide, I'm going to recap a little bit more on where the work program is at. So the key point really, as Anita said, is that this Generation 2 work isn't a brand new work program, but it's picking up some work that has been started and then has been paused, and now we're in a position to carry on again. The Generation 2 work actually started in late 2022, and at that stage it was proposed to include the future development strategy. That's still the proposal. And what that meant was that with the future development strategy, a whole series of steps needed to be followed under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development to work up an evidence base. And part of that is this technical document called the Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment. And there's also a requirement as part of developing a future development strategy to test alternative growth scenarios through public engagement. So there's all these statutory steps that need to be gone through. And the delays in the work program have been just around landing those technical pieces of evidence. The biggest one of those is the housing and business development capacity piece. And essentially what that's doing, and apologies if everyone is familiar with that, but what it's basically doing is assessing what's the supply of housing and business land in the district, and then what's the demand for that, and pinpointing any shortfalls. And with that in hand, the future development strategy can then respond to whatever issues have been picked up. So we are now at a stage where we have almost all of those technical pieces landed for that housing and business assessment. And so what that means is we can now stand back and work up a whole program to get to where we've got a completed Generation 2 spatial plan. And that's what I'll take us to now on the next slide.
I'll just check in there, Heidi. I can't see any hands up, but might be a good spot to check if there's any questions.
Yeah, I have one, Anita.
Yep. Thanks, Councillor Noon.
Hey, just going back, Heidi, to so it's not the slide before the one that's currently up. Yeah, so under future development strategies, it's not a statutory document. However, it's going to have statutory statements and information that come from existing statutory documents. Have I got that right?
It's a statutory document in the sense that it's required by the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and that NPS sets out, it really prescribes in detail how we develop it and what evidence we need and what public engagement we need to get.
Okay, so does a future development strategy carry the same weight as a district plan, or a plan change in a district plan, or a policy that's gone through a legal process which has the opportunity for it to be challenged and appealed and all the rest of it?
So it doesn't have the same one. Obviously, this is the thing that should direct the district plan.
Yep.
But it does still have weight in terms of it goes through a legal process. It has a hearing. Obviously, you sat on the panel for the FDS for Dunedin,
Yep,
so
yep.
you know about the hearings and the submissions. It is not a district plan. It's required by statute and informs, your long-term infrastructure strategy, your district plan, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you end up with a let's say it's a proposed, this is hypothetical, but a proposed residential development for somewhere in Queenstown Lakes, and would the future development strategy be able to provide additional layer of protection for a district plan provision through an environment court process?
Do you mean if the area that the development was proposed was identified as a growth area, or identified as, or the opposite, like
or the opposite? I was probably coming from a say a hazard perspective, wearing the I see that.
Yeah, it certainly would assist the decision maker in terms of knowing that it's an area that is or is not recommended in terms of development opportunities.
Okay, and it may help to support that decision. So it may be referenced in a decision to help strengthen the particular outcome or the assessment that's done by the commissioners or whatever.
Yeah, and if it's a resource consent, Section 104, this assessment done under Section 104 of the Act would enable consideration of an FDS, that's been through a public process to be a consideration in decision making. Yep.
Cool. Appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Forbes and then Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I'm just wondering about this. We go back to those slides where you're looking at in the very beginning, where you're looking at the what's wanted, and the next one. Yeah, thanks. As these outcomes and strategies, and they just seem so impossible under the current planning structures. Moving all of those people in ways other than cars, that just doesn't seem to be anything happening. Public transport, we can't get more routes and things in. We've got a sewage problem here. I just wonder what the use of this plan really becomes. Or do we just crack on and with a bit of hopium and keep moving and planning anyway?
Anita, I'm not sure if you're available to speak, I guess, to the parts of the spatial plan generation 1 that sit around the FDS in terms of the economic diversification plan and the destination management plan and things like that. Just not sure how well placed you are. So I guess in light of that silence, and Liz, I don't want to put you on the spot. There are other pieces of the puzzle. This document and these policy approaches will never be able to do it all on their own. I guess the key is to line up all of those things and make sure everything's going in the same direction. There are always going to be challenges that were not anticipated that will divert our focus away for a bit. Having said that, I think if we don't have those strategic objectives, then we're in a bit of trouble. However, the second generation plan gives us an opportunity to refine, refresh, update, simplify, streamline, consolidate, whatever it might be, those things. So we can have another look at it, as we move through the process. It's not much more answer, Councillor Forbes. Sorry, but
That's all good. It doesn't seem that those things are aligned at the moment. So maybe they'll come back into alignment somewhere down the track when everything comes to a standstill.
Anita, could I add a little?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
I think what I'd say there as well is in the Generation 2 work, we do have an opportunity to take a sharper focus on those constraints that we know are there. So we know we've got transport constraints. We think we're looking at some infrastructure constraints. So there is that opportunity to really sharpen up in Generation 2 and I suppose square up more to what does that mean in terms of where can growth occur and going to the community with some of the trade-offs around that. Back to you, Anita.
Thanks, Heidi. And then Councillor Wilson, you've
Thank you.
been waiting patiently.
Yeah, no, look, just two things. Just on that, it's interesting you've got to promote a car-free destination, which I think really aligns. You've got it under a sustainable tourism system. It's a statement that can be seen quite negatively by some parts of our community, whereas it really sits under public transport. I'm just wondering in the wording of those statements, and that's an example of one, whether we really have to be more careful about the language we use, and instead of using the words like prioritise investment in public transport, is putting things like ensuring public transport and active mode networks meet the demand right round central parts of Queenstown or something. There are statements you can put that can be constructive and less inflammatory than others, and I think that there's some in there that concern me. That's my first point. The second point is, can you guys go to the second last slide we had? And I'm just checking on the process. The next one, sorry. Yeah, this one, no, it's the next one after that. The HPA is imminent. So a new SPG2 work program has now been developed. Now, these things can't be done in parallel, and I'm just making sure that we can't be criticised for this. This has to be done in series. So
Yes.
this statement is wrong. We can't do the work program until the HPA is done.
Oh, so what we mean by that is we've set out what the next steps will be once the HPA is finalised. So that's
It is that language that will get us caught out in a appeal or a review, judicial review, because there are going to be people who are going to look for everything to be complained about.
Yeah, I think the point of taking care with the language we use is useful. Just with regard to the comments on your first comments, that's obviously the existing spatial plan where OSC was a stakeholder rather than a partner. And I think that valid point you made around how we say the same thing but in a different way is useful for us as we develop the next version of the spatial plan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. Shall we keep going?
Okay. So taking that point on board, we should really be framing as the intended work program. We've got this broken down into 7 stages, and as you can see, we're envisaging it will take around 18 months in total to get to a completed second generation spatial plan. where we're at the moment is almost finished with stage 1. So that's almost finished with that baseline evidence gathering piece. And from here on, the next stages basically move through developing up different spatial growth scenarios to test, getting public feedback on that, confirming which scenario to move forward with, flowing that through into making drafting changes to the draft generation 2, and taking that through the formal LGA process in 2026. And so for councillors, there are several touch points into this. As we said earlier, we're proposing to hold more workshops going forward, and that would be joint workshops is what we're proposing. So yourselves plus QLDC councillors. Alongside that, there's the touch point of that formal urban growth partnership. So there's the ability there through the governance group and the other levels to put forward views and have that policy oversight. And then alongside that, another important touch point is coming to council for formal council decisions. So there's effectively those 3 different touch points in this whole program. And alongside,
I was just going to say, obviously, as we move through these steps, at every step before we move to the next one, we would be asking, do we know more about the RM reform yet? Is this still the right thing to do? Is it still okay to go? Is this information still needed? So we will make sure that that's a conscious decision until we see what the package of work looks like.
And that takes me on into this next slide, which is around those broader dependencies. So in that broader legislative space, there's a whole range of different changes and processes that will have implications for the work, which we will be continuously considering and reporting back on. So taking some of the big ones in turn, in the resource management amendment space, the government has signalled a whole lot of changes to national direction under the RMA. So that's that package of national policy statements like the urban development one. And what's been signalled is, as part of those changes, for example, new direction is coming on natural hazards. So that's one example of something with potential for direct influence on the spatial plan and where growth is or isn't appropriate. And we're expecting middle of this year to see some more detail on what that national direction change will look like. Another really big piece is the broader resource management system replacement. And similarly, we're expecting later this year to see much more detail on that and for the bills to be introduced later this year. What we've seen so far in the signalling around that is actually a much bigger role for spatial planning. So bringing spatial planning content into the new regional plans that will be required. So one plan per region, and that would have spatial plan content contained in it. Part of that RMA replacement proposal as well is giving spatial plans more weight. So actually giving spatial plans more regulatory force in the system. And what's being signalled as well is some of the things which are currently required for future development strategies will shift into being spatial planning requirements. So the sort of work that we're currently doing around identifying development constraints, identifying where growth should occur, those sorts of requirements are likely to shift from being future development strategy content to being spatial plan content. Alongside those RMA pieces, another relevant process going on is the Standalone Fast Track Approvals Act, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. That's got a list of proposals in Otago that are going to be following the fast track process. And it also provides for other proposals to seek to go down the fast track route as well. So what we're intending to do in the spatial planning work is to think about and include those listed fast track projects when we're doing the work of developing up growth scenarios to test. And so that means that we're able to consider, would those projects add significant development capacity? It also means that when those fast track applications come to council for us to comment, there is a more limited ability to comment than under the current consent system, but when they do come to us for that more limited comment, we're able to draw on the assessment work we've done in the spatial plan space to give our comments. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of other work going on, so our colleagues at QRDC are carrying out a relevant plan change, which is to enable more intensification, so more residential intensification. And that work is going to draw on the evidence that we're developing for Generation 2. It's also actually implementing that Generation 1 goal around consolidating growth and having more affordable housing, more housing choice. So yeah, just stepping back, there is a lot going on in the wider context, and as Anita said, we will be constantly considering at each step in the work program whether what we're doing is still relevant in the context of whatever the requirements now are. And just to finish off by bringing it back to the sort of imminent next steps. So we need to basically land those last bits of technical evidence, and that will allow us to finalise the draft work programme. After that, we'll be able to develop up engagement materials, and what we're wanting to do is come back to you in May, possibly in June, depending on how we're able to schedule it, but we're wanting to come back to you with those draft spatial scenarios to get your views before we go out for public engagement on that. So I appreciate there's lots of process in all of that, but we wanted to just give you this opportunity to get familiar again with the work area and all of the context before the more substantive stuff starts to flow through. I can see Councillor Wilson has a hand up, and that is the end of the slide pack. So I'll stop there and turn to Councillor Wilson's question.
Sorry, look, that's great. Thank you, Heidi. We're just finishing off the submissions on the Regional Passenger Transport Plan, and I look at how important transport is in the current strategies framework. How is stuff that's going to come out of the housing and business development capacity assessment going to be transferred into any ambitious regional passenger transport plan? Given the speed of growth there, that means that we will need to be having that at the top of our mind in our planning, because it's a 10-year document. That may be an Anita question.
I don't even know if it's me, Councillor Wilson. I guess I'm not quite sure what assumptions are built into the model for the HBA. Obviously, sort of as a separate piece of work, we do the network modelling, and we've got a joint model with Queenstown Lakes in terms of transport demand and things like that. So there's separate operational things that happen. But Liz, do you know if there's any assumptions around transport or transport related things in the HBA at all in the modelling work?
Not at the moment. So the HBA essentially looks at council's 3 waters, and also its local roading. So it doesn't generally take into account things like public transport or other aspects, because it's really just looking at supply and demand. We have had previous HBAs where we've had a look at the bridge constraints and what traffic congestion might mean for areas developing. That's not been built into this model because it's not a component of the MPSUD, but it will form part of the report that we're doing, and it'll be more of a qualitative sort of assessment of how that's sort of going, less about public transport. What the HBA should do is provide an evidence base to say, we've got all this demand coming, can we provide the capacity to meet that sort of supply? And if there are constraints that we're aware of, such as traffic congestion or a lack of wastewater or water, all the HBA would do would sort of say that's the case, and then what their spatial plan should then be doing is responding to that.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, hey, thanks so much. Hey, just with regards to the housing and business development capacity assessment, like remember with the Dunedin one, there was a number of submissions that, you know, pushed back on the direction, i.e. the various scenarios, the 3 scenarios that they came up with. And I just wondered, is it part of the process that we get a, not so much a peer review, but I don't know, a fresh pair of eyes, lens, whatever, over that assessment to give it some, I suppose, to make it a little bit more defendable, I suppose. But I don't know, is that a requirement with the statutory process or not?
I'll let Liz speak specifically to that, but generally part of the reason that we are updating the work is to increase our defensibility. Obviously Queenstown is a more litigious environment than Dunedin, and we wanted to make sure that we had a really good evidential base within what that was informing the decisions that we were making in terms of the consultant support and the modelling. Liz, are you able to speak to that process?
Yeah, I mean, the HBA, with it being an evidential base, it doesn't actually come to council for them to approve it. It's usually a noting paper, because there isn't anything as such for council to approve. There is obviously the risk of judicial review if people really disagree with some of that background information, such as demand projections, and that's always a risk. So what we have to do is be just very clear as we're building the model and working through the report that, but just being very clear essentially on what our assumptions are and why we've used them, and why they're fit for purpose. And that's probably the main way that we'll try and manage any risks associated with people disagreeing with the HBA. Because I mean, one of the, I suppose, the things that might come out of this is that I would say at the moment, it's the initial modelling results are not showing any plan enable capacity issues. Pretty much we've got sufficient plan enable capacity. Any issues that might be coming through is probably more from an infrastructure servicing of all of the zones that we've got. But what that may mean is that some of our developers might not be very happy about the fact that we're not potentially showing new areas for zoning if we don't need them. And that's just something that we're going to have to sort of manage through the process.
Can I just look back a little bit, Liz? Sorry. And the question more is in terms of when we contracted that work and developed the work program, do we build in and do we budget for a peer review of either the data sets or the modelling, or how do we manage that process either through another consultant reviewing or through our own internal processes before we use it to inform the scenarios?
It's been, so the HBA, all the evidence bases in there have all been peer reviewed internally by council staff, strategic growth team, the policy team, and our infrastructure team. We wouldn't use consultants to do that work because they're basically not in the, the deep of all the information that goes into these assessments.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Any other questions? If there's not, we'll give you 45 minutes back, which I feel like is overachieving. And I'm more than happy to do that because normally we take time away from you. So if there aren't any more questions, then the next steps will be, as Heidi mentioned, we'll have some reporting back. May is probably getting too tight given it's May tomorrow, but soon anyway. And we'll look forward to some joint workshops with our QLDC colleagues.
Thanks, Anita.
It's good. Thanks, Anita. I think time to wrap it up. Yep.
Yep.
You know, so thank you very much for for that update. That briefing has sort of been parked in our minds for a wee while, I guess, hasn't it? It's just really good to bring it out and shake the dust off and get our heads back in the game. So thanks very much and for doing that. And May does seem pretty close today, doesn't it? So
Sure does.
but at the end of the day, it seems once you get your HPA over the line, we can actually start getting on with with your set program to actually make some progress going forward. So we look forward to that, and hopefully hopefully it doesn't get too tangled up with our time off through August, September, or whenever that happens. So, but it's good to see that it's still in the pot and getting worked on. So, thank you very much for bringing that to us, and thank you to everybody who's attended the briefing here today, and I believe it's recorded for other ones. And thanks for the questions as well, because I think it's really good to have people that know the right questions to ask as well. For people that haven't been around this sort of urban development stuff, it's really good to have some of the experienced councillors asking the right questions. So that's really appreciated as well. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hopefully I'd imagine towards the end of May, getting some sort of insight as to what the 3 options may end up being. So we'll call it a day. So thank you very much, and we'll catch up next time.
So thanks, Lloyd. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Liz.